Okay, hi guys, and welcome to the show. You join me not in Philadelphia, but in Reno for the 2019 Air Race. And of course, I'm supporting this team. You're probably wondering why. There we go, yeah. It's Fortis, and that is my wristwatch check. Naturally, I had to wear the Cosmonaut in tribute of this amazing Swiss brand. And talking of Swiss watch brands, today we're going to take a look at, well, in my opinion, the best aviation watches, best Swiss aviation watches. We're going to look at Oris, IWC, Bell & Ross. Thanks to Watchbox, of course. So without further ado, let's have a look around because this place is crazy. There's a race going on right now. You can probably hear it. There's incredibly cool planes. We're going to talk to the pilots, have a look at the planes themselves. So without further ado, let's get into it.
Before we get into the watches, a little bit of history and background. The Reno Air Races is officially known as the National Championship Air Races, and it is a multi-day event tailored to the aviation community that takes place in September at the Reno Steed Airport, which is a few miles north of Reno in Nevada. Air racing is billed as the world's fastest motorsport, and this yearly event is one of the few remaining venues. Only in America can you see such an exhilarating spectacle. The event includes races in 6 classes of plane, from super fast jets to biplanes and everything in between. As well as spectacular demonstrations, you can wander around and really get up close to these majestic beasts of the skies. As a bit of a die-cast aircraft collector myself, it was wonderful to finally see some of these legends in the flesh, and to hear them actually flying was a beautiful sight and sound to behold. Among my favourites was the World War II Mitchell bomber, as well as a Japanese Zero that was used in several movies. P-51s, Sea Furies, Corsairs, Bearcats, and so much more. The list is simply endless.
This beautiful beast here was racing actually this morning, so very, very cool. I love all the technical new stuff, but I have to admit, there's a charm about this propeller age. I've always adored these the shapes, the colours. It's kind of more romantic, a bit like mechanical versus quartz. Interesting analogy.
What makes this event particularly special is how close you can get to the action. The thunderous noise of the jets is incredible. On top of that, I was able to get some exclusive access behind the scenes and spend several days with the Thunder Mustang racing team, courtesy of one of their sponsors, the massively important Swiss watch brand Fortis. As the name implies, Thunder Mustang uses 2 specially custom-made P-51 aircraft and race in the sport class at an excess of 300 miles per hour. Pilot Pete Zaccagnino flew the Thunder Mustang Racing number 67 Swiss Thunder, and Bob Mills flew the Class Thunder number 151. Both are replicas of the world-famous North American P-51 Mustang, known of course as the Cadillac of the skies. However, these feature the very powerful Falconer V12 American-made racing engines. This 12-cylinder liquid-cooled V engine has a power output of 640 horsepower. The number 151 was upgraded this year with a very distinctive 5-blade propeller. This was, from my understanding, an attempt to give it more thrust. Also, one cannot deny it looks ruddy cool as well. I was deeply impressed how hard the team worked, sometimes all night repairing the engine. It really felt like a family, and to see such passion was inspiring. The fact Fortis are the only watch brand directly supporting a team speaks volumes about them as well. Many pilots from rival teams would stop by and purchase a Fortis. It's also cool to note that jet class winner Pete Zaccagnino wore a Fortis this year during racing, reaching a staggering speed of over 500 miles per hour. So let's listen to a few words from the living legend himself.
So this is the L29. We have a big motor in it. It's a Pratt & Whitney JT12. It produces 3,000 pounds of thrust compared to the stock engine that only produces 1,900 pounds of thrust. This was my second gold championship in 2013. right after I won, they changed the rules and I couldn't race it anymore. So in 2015, I came back with a Vampire that we rebuilt, brought back to life, and we won. And it was one of the most competitive races here at Reno. It was fantastic. And then I had an event in 2016 that resulted in me landing the Vampire in the desert that's out there.
Right.
And it was safe and sound.
Right.
And then I started bringing this fast motor and airplane back here to race again. So we raced last year. She got some bugs from it. Took second place last year. Who remembers second place though?
Right.
So this winter we did a lot of work, and now we brought this plane, qualified at 510 miles an hour. That put us in second place. And today I have a lot of work to do to get back into the first place position.
Right. So you're going to be racing in like what, a couple of minutes?
I am racing in about 1 hour.
Nice. And he's wearing Fortis, of course.
And so, in the start, it's a big deal because I'm chasing a Vampire, and he's a good pilot, fast airplane, and I got to make some key decisions early in that race because as he burns fuel, he's going to get lighter and lighter.
Right. And faster and faster.
Correct.
Right. What makes you keep coming back?
Well, the competition's great, and you're flying with some of the best pilots in the world, and that level keeps you very sharp, and I like that. Once you're on the race course, it's a very personal moment that's occurring, and it's all accountable on you, coupled in with some of the other racers. And so that accountability for the individual, it's pretty intense.
Right.
And I like that.
Right. That's what attracts you.
Yeah, it's a big part of it. It makes you want to be in that first place position, and at least for me.
Thank you so much for
Pleasure.
talking. Good
See
luck
you after the
today.
race.
Yes.
Yeah.
Barbecue,
Yeah.
drinks.
What is wonderful about this romantic golden age of propeller-powered aircraft, aside from the beautiful aircrafts themselves, is timing was incredibly crucial. No matter if the pilot was racing, traveling, exploring, or in combat, the necessity for a reliable timepiece as a navigation tool or an instrument for calculation was invaluable. These days, pilot watches are among the most popular watch styles. This is mainly due to the fascinating history that is inextricably linked to mankind pushing the boundaries of flight and that spirit of adventure they evoke, as well as the obvious functional practicality they still provide to this day.
It's really cool. There they go. Amazing. Really, really amazing. Repping NDC, of course.
The history of the pilot's watch can be traced as far back to 1904 with the development of the Cartier Santos. This watch was named after the Brazilian aviation pioneer Alberto Santos Dumont, who was the first to conduct a powered flight in Europe in 1906. In preparation for his daring flight, Santos Dumont requested a timepiece that would allow him to use both hands to control the aircraft, and turned to his friend Louis Cartier to devise an easy, legible timepiece. This development replaced the tradition of a pocket watch. Among Cartier, other notable innovators include Zenith and Longines. Zenith produced a timepiece in 1909 which was famously used by the French aviator and engineer Louis-Charles Joseph Blériot during the first flight across the English Channel. The next big milestone was in 1927 when the Longines accompanied the American aviator Charles A. Lindbergh in the first solo airplane flight across the Atlantic Ocean. The watch was in fact co-designed by Lindbergh himself. He sought a multi-purpose instrument that featured a complication that would allow him to accurately determine longitude during the long-distance flight. As with so much technology, nothing propelled the development and advancement and need for pilot watches as did war. The functional, easy-to-read style was very much defined during these periods to meet the demands of the pilots, challenged by adverse conditions or poor lighting. Therefore, watch manufacturers often designed even larger timepieces with simplistic layouts, like what we saw with the German Fliegers of World War II. In addition, they would incorporate luminous hour markers and hands to improve nighttime readability. In the post-war aviation boom, we see perhaps the most exciting and varied advancements in pilot watches. As both private and commercial aviation expanded, so did the demand for aviation instruments. In 1952, Breitling introduced the Navitimer, allowing a whole plethora of calculations to be made via the slide rule bezel, essentially making it a wrist-top computer. In 1955, Rolex collaborated with Pan American Airways and introduced the GMT Master. This now commonplace complication, an extra 24-hour hand, was designed for intercontinental airline pilots traveling across time zones. And as mankind entered the jet and subsequent digital age, Breitling would return to pioneer and reinvent the pilot watch as we know it in the mid-80s with the aerospace. This Ani-Digi hybrid would add all the complications and practicality of digital watches in an easy-to-read and manipulate single crown. The innovation and demand continues. You only have to look at G-Shock's Gravity Master or Breitling's Emergency to see that this genre of watch is still very much going strong into the 21st century.
Welcome back, guys. It's day 2, big race day here today. So we're going to see the team actually in action. Very exciting. They're just doing the last minute tweaks on the engine, making sure everything's running okay. In the meantime, I'm going to go and take a look at some more of these incredible aircraft from World War II, the jet age, you name it, they got it. It's spellbinding finally seeing some of these aircraft that I've kind of not lusted after, but you know, always looked at in pictures, in books, collected the die-cast models, all the rest of it. So it's very cool to see them in the flesh, and I'll try and get inside of some of them as well. So let's take a look. This is absolutely crazy. So if you've seen Band of Brothers, you know what this is all about. Let's go and have a look at the cockpit. Yeah, so we got radio here. It's so much smaller than I had imagined. Oh, and then you've got like a rooftop that opens up. That's interesting. I didn't know that. My God, this is very cool. Funny enough, it's Mustangs flying, so rather fitting of the era. But yeah, I can't get over. I can't get over how small this is. This is crazy, look at that. Something very cool indeed. If you look inside the engine of every single plane, there's always a good luck penny. Oh, and then the jets are racing behind us, so I do apologize. But anyway, really cool little fact. You can see it in every single plane. So before I left for Reno, I grabbed a bunch of watches from the Watchbox inventory and some from my personal collection to really represent, I think, the kind of underrated sweet spots of entirely Swiss-made, under $4,000. So we really should get Fortis out of the way first. As you guys know, I'm a massive fan of the brand. I visited their factory in Gretchen back in 2017, and I fell in love with the earlier 38mm Cosmonaut, which I have since bought various versions of. This is my penultimate one with the 5100 Le Mans in it, and with quite a unique and distinctive way of showing the minutes with that jet arrow hand. Very, very cool day date. And of course the 24-hour complication, because in space you need to know when is day or night, because you simply don't have that cycle in the blackness of space, so to speak. Fortis were founded in 1912 and have a really rich, illustrious history. They went through a little bit of money issues back just after I visited them, and now thankfully they have a new owner who's revitalizing the brand, really cares about the brand, and they're still privately held, which I think is fantastic, because they do have such an integral history to Swiss watchmaking. I mean,
They were one of the first to manufacture and sell automatic wristwatches in collaboration with John Harwood, the British horologist and inventor of the automatic wristwatch. This was way back in, I think, 1926. They were the first to actually patent the automatic watch, beating Rolex and all the other brands. But their history is just as rich in the latter part of the 20th century, being involved since 1994 as this official supplier of the Russian Federal Space Agency. Beyond that, in terms of aviation watches, they've supplied some of the most elite military squadrons worldwide, including the Swiss 11 fighters, the Hellenic Tigers of Greece, the NATO forces in Hungary, the Immelmann 51 of Germany, the Thunder Tiger aerobatic team of Taiwan, the Papa Squadron of Hungary as well. The list simply goes on and on and on. So their link to aviation watches is unquestionably one of the deepest and worthy of respect. So looking at all their watches, you can see that heavy Flieger aviation inspiration. Now, I grabbed this one. Now, this essentially is a modern, I guess you could say, descendant of my Cosmonaut there, but this time it's a Valjoux 7750 based, automatic, a staggering 200 meters of water resistance, without even a screw-down crown, and that kind of illustrates the point. And you can see the anti-reflective coating there on that flat sapphire. It has a dive time style bezel, but also very nifty way of incorporating a tachometer on the chapter ring there. Day complications. This is just like the one I reviewed, but this is a newer version too, specially designed for the Amity 18, which is an experiment held in the desert of Oman to simulate the mission to Mars. So, and by the way, this is 120 click unidirectional, by the way. Fortis started their involvement with space watches all the way back in the 60s, supplying the original Spacematic to the pilots of, or the astronauts, I should say, of the Gemini space program. So it's interesting to think that their involvement is as old as the Omega Speedmaster, but this will actually be worn for the Mars missions in the future. So it's just astounding to think. And of course, you have that orange hand, the very typical kind of style traits of Fortis. Now, it is a big watch. If I just quickly get the dimensions out of the way, 43 millimeters. The bezel does overhang a little bit. The height is very thick indeed at 15 millimeters, and lug to lug we're looking at just shy of 53, with a surprisingly small 20 millimeters lug width. These are very hefty pieces indeed. However, I have to say, on my wrist, it doesn't overhang too much because of those curved kind of eagle beak style lugs. The entire case is stainless steel. In fact, every watch we're looking at today is stainless steel, so I'm not going to repeat myself. But this does have a very cool looking PVD black coating, but this is done in extra thick, double the usual amount. This is for extra durability, but also you don't want to reflect light. The Fortis Cosmonaut, whether it's this particular version or even a vintage version like mine, it's always the toughest watch in the room. They're basically mechanical G-Shocks, if you can imagine, that have been specifically tested and proven in space for decades. On the back you can see the Russian Cosmonaut Agency logo there. Very cool watch. I mean, extremely tool-tastic. Nothing is there without reason. If you want a more in-depth review, have a look back at the standard version. This is definitely a cool progression. Full luminescence, excellent legibility. I mean, this is big on purpose. This is not big to be a fashion statement. The weight is a staggering 133 grams. Super luminova for the lume, of course. And it comes on this hybrid high performance combination strap of both leather and rubber, and I love how it kind of integrates into the case. Very cool indeed. everything on this watch is turned up to 11. I mean, it's almost over-engineered, but it's supposed to be. I mean, these are notoriously tough watches. They are specially fine-tuned for space, which of course translates to a fantastic pilot's watch. They're unpretentious, unlike any other brand. I think Fortis is one of the... Actually, I'll say it, I think Fortis is the most underrated Swiss brand of all time. I'm very proud to own a Fortis watch. I think they still make real tour watches, and their prices I think are very fair. They're not trying to be luxury, they're not trying to be anything other than to serve a purpose. The only criticism is obviously they don't make the smaller sizes anymore. It's a real shame, but you can still pick these ones well under 4,000. These are approaching probably 2. This is a limited edition, so extremely rare. But yeah, you can pick up the vintage models. There's if you want to go smaller, you can use the Spacematic, although that is just a simple 3-hander with a day and a date. It is 40 millimeters. I would love to see a modern version of this in a 38 millimeter size again. But anyway, let's move on to a brand we haven't actually featured on the channel before, and long overdue, and this is of course Bell and Ross. And this is a very handsome piece as well. This is part of their vintage collection. So Bell & Ross is actually a French brand. It was started quite recently in 1992 and founded by Bruno Bellamich, who's a designer, and Carlos Rosillo, who's a businessman. But it is actually based in Le Champ-de-Fonds in Switzerland, and they are of course Swiss made, as you see on the dial. Now, they're more famous for the square cockpit instrument-inspired designs that have become iconic in their own right. But in the mid-2000s, they started putting out very cleanly, beautifully designed round pieces like this. Initially, their watches were all produced by Zinn up until the partnership ended in 2002. They were simply just Zinn watches produced by Zinn, but then with Bell & Ross on the dial. But since then, they've really kind of come into their own. Now, what they may lack in heritage, like the other brands here that all have extremely long history and involvement in aviation, they make up for with very tastefully done designs. So this is the BR126 original, entirely stainless steel again, with this incredible quality, and you know, it goes without saying Fortis are beautifully made. I've seen them being assembled in Switzerland, but again, we have this impeccably executed case, the brushing, the finishing, the contrast between these high polished surfaces, and this is a little bit more, not so much a straightforward tool. This actually, it does remind me a little bit of Panerai. In fact, their logo always has reminded me of Panerai. It comes on this fantastic bracelet that has little hollow sections and attaches with screws there. You get a double push button to deploy it there. The logo is a kind of little lip you can use there. Case back is nothing to write home about. Screw down, same as before. But I love the balance of the dial. We get beautifully loomed up 12 and 6 for great orientation. Sword hands, very typical of aviation watches. And of course this compact layout with a little date hidden away at the 430. Very clean. And then this incredible super domed sapphire with anti-reflective coating that gives it very much a kind of vintage character, but obviously without the distortions of plexiglass. It's very, very clear. Beautiful sub-seconds and a 30-minute register. Inside is the BR Caliber 301, which I think essentially is an ETA 2894. Now, what grade? I'm not exactly sure. Their website doesn't specify. They are tested. To what degree? I have no idea. The accuracy on this, I am getting a like a +4, +5 a day, which is absolutely fine. Did really enjoy wearing this. I took it off the bracelet simply. I just didn't want to muck up the bracelet because this has obviously got to go back to the watch box inventory. But I did enjoy this. Extremely legible and highly underrated in my opinion. I think it's got a beautiful balance and symmetry to that dial. The black is a matte black, but then we have concentric circle designs for the subdials that just help to differentiate it. The font is very Panerai-ish as well, so it does make me think of the 1930s especially. The diameter is a lovely 41 millimeters. It is rather tubby at just shy of 14 millimeters. Quite long lugs, so we're looking at 50, just shy of 50. Yeah, we're looking at 50 millimeters, so quite long, and the lug width is a large 22 millimeters. On the wrist, the lugs wear flat, so certainly not for the small wrist. I have a 6¼ inch wrist. While I can get away with it, and obviously aviation watches, like divers, are supposed to be a little bigger, yeah, it's more for the larger wrist in general. It weighs 172 grams, so it's quite heavy. It has a very reassuring presence. I love the bezel, the way it frames. It's slightly kind of Speedmaster-esque in the way it frames the crystal there. Color scheme is just makes it an absolute strap monster. The little details like the sandblasted finish of the and there, piston head pushers. This particular ETA is a cam switching based actuations. Interestingly, without a screw down crown, it manages to achieve 100 meters water resistance, which for a chronograph with pushers and a non-screw down crown is fairly impressive. Its only negative really is the lack of prestige in the history compared to the other brands here, but definitely highly overlooked, and I have enjoyed my time with it, certainly. Okay, next we had to include Oris. Now this is a rather unusual choice because technically this is not an aviation watch. However, its roots very much are. Now Oris's involvement in aviation goes all the way back to the early 1920s. Even earlier with if you saw my review of the 1917, which was a reissue of one of their classic flight watches. Oris are another privately held company, started in 1904. The pointer date is probably their most longest running icon, rather, that is highly underrated. I chose this one because this spectacular wine red, almost cherry red dial, which I've never seen on a watch, but it really pops. In this design, you'll see hallmarks that haven't changed. The very first pointer date, which came out in 1938, and it, of course, had cathedral hands and this almost Art Deco aesthetic with the numerals. It would show the date with an extra hand, 1 to 31 numbers at the periphery of the dial, separating from the hours by that railroad track. This hasn't changed at all. I mean, the dial design has evolved, and there are more intricately decorated dials with the kind of guilloche patterns and all the rest of it, but essentially these characteristics, along with the big crown and the coinage bezel there, have remained the same. So what has this got to do with aviation? Well, the big crown was originally designed for pilots. In these early rudimentary planes, often the cockpits were exposed, and so they'd wear gloves. They'd need to be able to manipulate the watch without taking their gloves off, so the big crown was introduced. However, this has translated over the years into a beautiful dress watch, a bit like the Cartier Santos. So this is bang up to date, contemporary version, powered by an automatic Celita there. We've got the custom iconic red rotor, a decent 50 meters water resistance. We've got the display back, a beautifully curved domed sapphire with anti-reflective coating, of course. Luminous markers for excellent legibility, and cathedral hands, which is unusual but more typical of in the 1930s. The added bonus is that these shapes, these distinct shapes, are easier to differentiate between the two, so actual reading the time in low light is fairly efficient. The crown actually is a screw down, and if we pull it out to the first position, the quick set, instead of a changing date wheel, we advance around that dial with that little, how would you even describe that, illustrating what the date is? And you can see why I had to include it. Certainly with this dial combination, the color scheme, it's unusual and quite refreshing. Signed crown, of course, and it comes on this wonderful calfskin distressed strap, very reminiscent of collarette, to be honest. It's lovely and supple, and it's got real character that kind of exudes that vintage look and feel. On my 6 1/4" wrist, it wears marvelously well. We have really great angular lugs, well, angular at the end, but curved, with the coin edge sitting just a little bit sunken into it. Nice subtle detail. Follows the contour of your wrist wonderfully and sits very confidently. It is 40 millimeters in diameter at only just shy of 12. It's 11.7 or 11.5, I can't quite remember, but 20 millimeters lug width. Yeah, with the curvature of that dome, it's very dressy, and it looks dressy too. It has an elegance of the 1930s, which was always a very, people were far more stylish, let's be honest. It's astonishing to think that it's been going for so long. Okay, next we have my Navitimer 806. This is with the Venus 178 inside, column wheel chronograph. This is from 1970. Now, I've reviewed this and many Navitimers to death several times, so I'm not going to go into it too much, but we should talk about Breitling. Interestingly, it was the brand I saw worn the most at Reno. Everything from Cosmonaut, a lot of aerospaces, emergencies, several Navitimers, your standard Navitimers, vintage Navitimers, modern ones, all the rest of it. They are big watches, they were always big, since the early days, 41 millimeters, etc. Never with the great water resistance that has been their Achilles heel. Look at my special about space watches and what happened to Scott Carpenter's Cosmonaut was really unfortunate. Their history is undeniable. I mean, I've already mentioned it, discussing the history of pilot watches. You cannot ignore Breitling, and in a wider sense, the history of the chronograph. They were integral in introducing the first two pushers. A lot of things about chronographs we take for granted, Breitling invented. But why we should mention them in this video is because you rarely get the best of Breitling under $4,000. Whether it's in a more obscure models like the Chronospace I previously owned and very much regret. I'm probably going to buy it back at some point. I just think it's such a cool ani-digi thing, it's very fun. It's a wonderful utilization of a thermocompensated quartz. Or Navitimers of all types. I bought this just shy of 4. The Cosmonaut was about 3.5, which is very unique with that 24-hour dial. And then things like the aerospace, which are still way under $2,000 on used market. And then there's more kind of quirky pieces like Pluton quartz watches, things like of that nature. I think Breitling, without a shadow of a doubt, have contributed to the development of aviation watches more than any other brand in this price range, unquestionably. And especially their newer pieces, the quality's far superior and more tough than this. This is from 1970 or late 60s. Anyway, let's move on to another watch brand we have reviewed extensively before, but this I think actually is one of the stars of the show. I really enjoyed my time with this. IWC, as you know, are from Schaffhausen in the northern part of Switzerland, close to the border with Germany. Founded in 1868, they have been making pilot watches since the very beginning, both for Germany and like the Mark series. This deliberately takes inspiration from watches issued by the British Ministry of Defence in the 40s. That's where it gets this particular style of numerals. But it certainly brings a legitimacy to this watch design. This was released in 2016 at SIHH. I chose this because unlike all the other watches, it's very petite at 36 millimeters. It is unisex, and it comes on this almost kind of slightly Jubilee-esque bracelet, but the bracelet is an astounding achievement. If you see those little circles underneath, every single link is adjustable. You can take out any of these links, so you can get a fit on this, which unlike any other watch. Butterfly deployment there, signed up IWC, very cool indeed. Now, I didn't wear it on the bracelet because I was scared of scratching it. Another feature I adore is that slate grey sunburst effect dial. Grey dials are really overlooked. I had a grey dial Datejust once, and I still miss that. I borrowed it off a friend actually, and it's a dial color that you don't see too often, but is, especially when the sunburst effect is quite resplendent and definitely alluring. I love the little recessed ring there separating the minute track. Big sword hands, very typical date at the 3 o'clock, of course. This is has the caliber 35111, which is a high-grade Celita SW300 based. However, it is the highest grade version. They regulate it in-house at IWC to their own specifications, similar to COSC. It is not a certified chronometer, but well, this one certainly is performing as good as COSC. Now, I didn't mention the weight of the Navi. The Navi is about 70 grams, and this, on the full bracelet, is only 112 grams. Lovely, slender, thin, super thin profile. Look at that. I mean, for a small wrist, it's perfect. It's refreshing to see a Flieger-style watch that is this size. Quite a way ahead of the trend in 2016, I have to say. It's only 10.5 millimeters thick, and I think 46 lug to lug, so it just wears masterfully well, and yeah, that dial is just so enticing. It contrasts the white, crisp numerals very, very well. So it is essentially, it still does its job of being very legible, as a good pilot watch should be. Another aspect is that it does get a screw-down crown, interestingly, with that beautiful signed crown with the IWC saying Probus Scafusia, which is handcrafted from Schaffhausen, I believe, in Latin. Another quite unique feature is that inside there is actually a soft iron case for extra protection against magnetism, which is something you really want in the cockpit, but also translates to a great everyday protection, especially if you're like me, you use a laptop every day, the magnetic fields from speakers or equipment. It's so very practical. It's very understated, but the only thing that kind of announces its presence, I guess, is the high polish on the bezel, and then satinize on the side. That combination is continued on the bracelet there. My only complaint about this particular watch is the loom. You only get the triangle and the hands, the hour and the minutes loomed up. Unfortunately, the numerals are not loomed. I think that was a crying shame, a missed opportunity. Otherwise, it would have been absolutely perfect. Very, very comfortable on a NATO strap, or you could even put it on a leather strap and it would be very, very dressy. I mean, certainly slides under the cuff better than any of the other watches here. So you get a usable 60 meter water resistance, which is absolutely fine, so you don't have to worry about it getting wet. Subtly curved sapphire there, and you can see the anti-reflective coating. The quality is also impeccably done and beautifully executed. The finishing, the transitions, you can hardly see it, but look at the little beveling done on that edge. A subtle watch, certainly. Very much embodies the stylistic kind of purity that IWC always bring to the table. It's such a clever watch because what they've done is that they've taken that design language from the classic, iconic Mark series, with all that prestigious military history and involvement, but they've put it into an everyday watch, into a size that, well, it wears, I gotta be honest, it wears like a Datejust, you know, almost as versatile as a Datejust. It's surprisingly elegant. It's surprisingly kind of sophisticated feeling. Very cool. I like that every watch here is a kind of slightly underrated, you know. I think Breitling, the Navitimer, while yeah, certainly the most iconic out of the bunch, still does not get the recognition, I feel, in my opinion, that it deserves. The Oris and the IWC also evoke a feeling of luxury, and compared to the unapologetically masculine macho Fortis. Anyway, let's take it back to the airfield.
Okay guys, so unfortunately the pilot isn't feeling too well, so I'm going to step in and fly on behalf of Fortis. It's been an amazing time. I've really enjoyed myself. Thank you to Fortis so much. I'm definitely never going to forget this. Anyway guys, leave your comments, thoughts, queries, opinions, all the rest of it down below. Thank you so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed it, found it useful, and as always guys, I will catch you in the next one. Okay, ciao.
Now before I go guys, I just want to quickly tell you about this extremely cool app that Watchbox have launched. This is my own personal go-to app for everything watch related. Using the app, you can keep track of the real-time value of your watch collection. You can store watches in your digital watch box and even try on watches using an augmented reality. So don't miss out and please go to the App Store and download it today. You can access all of my latest videos right there in the app itself. And if you haven't already, please follow me on the official Urban Gentry Instagram and of course the Facebook UGWC. But most importantly of all, keep it positive, onwards and upwards.